Dr. Paul, I'd like to begin with you. Every debate begins with a specific policy question, but this is a little different. Someone on this stage hopes to be able to take the oath of office 14 months from now, and at the end of that oath are the words, "So help me God." When you hear those 4 words, if you have the opportunity and the privilege to say them, what will come to mind?
Well, I think they're very important. We take, those of us who have been in Congress and served in government, we take an oath frequently. We take an oath to uphold the Constitution. And that's what we do when we take an oath when we're sworn in as president. We emphasize this. But I think what that does, it emphasizes it even more so because of the significance and the importance. And it reiterates the fact that we swear to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law. And to this, to me, this would mean that you're not only saying this, in front of a small number of people, not only in front of the nation, but before our God, which means the significance is that much greater. So those of us who have done this before, and I've taken my oath rather seriously, very seriously, and believe that I've done a very good job in upholding the Constitution, and even when sometimes it's difficult. And this to me would send the signal that by saying, "So help me God," I really will obey the Constitution and that pledge. I think the issue is obviously very important, and we can charge one side or the other of influencing our culture too much. But the goal of government isn't to mold society and mold people. The role of government is to preserve liberty, so we as individuals assume the responsibility and our families assume the responsibility. Our values should come from our family and from our church. But once we say, well, the liberals are doing this because they want this economic interference and we're going to have perfect balance and fairness, they overdo it. But you can do it on both sides. You can say, well, we're going to make people better by having more laws. I think culture is very important. Culture has a reflection on the law, and I think that is very good. But the law can't reflect the morality of the people. If you do that, you have embarked on something where you sacrifice liberty. Once you turn this over to government, when government assumes this role, it can only do that at the sacrifice of liberty. So our goal ought to be to preserve liberty so that we have our religious values and we make our own decisions. If we can make our self-determination for our hereafter and our spiritual life, certainly on our own personal habits and our economic habits and how we spend our money, certainly we should assume that the people can do this. The guidance should come from individuals, from our family, and from our church. I think it's wrong to assume that if you legalize liberty and freedom, that because somebody might do something wrong, you don't want to legalize it. Liberty doesn't mean libertine. It means you have choices, but you suffer the consequences. It does not mean endorsement. When you legalize freedom of choice, think about it in a religious sense. We legalize, and we do a pretty good job in this country on the First Amendment. We legalize our freedom of choice in our religious value. But in this country, you're even allowed to be an atheist. But if you say, well, there's the danger of being atheist, so we can't legalize freedom of choice in religion, or we can't legalize freedom. Maybe somebody will want too many homeschoolers. So no, you want to legalize liberty. You don't want to designate what your beliefs are going to be because somebody might abuse it. And they have to assume the responsibility for making the mistakes. But because somebody might make a bad choice, you don't say give up on liberty. This is what the liberals do when they come to economics. Somebody might not make a good choice. They might not take care of themselves. They might not save for them for their retirement. So therefore, we have to be the protector. We have to protect the people from themselves. So I think overall, the defense of liberty is really what we need in this country because we're losing it, unfortunately.
What is your worldview? And speak of it in terms of freedom, responsibility, and morality.
I talk about it a whole lot because I talk about freedom a lot and I talk about responsibility. And I tell young people, and I talk to a lot of young people, that if we can get a free society today and get you out into a position where you don't have to endorse government medicine and government education and you can opt out of Social Security, I says, one thing is, if you get your freedom, you have to accept the responsibility. You can't, if you fail in taking care of yourself, if you want your freedom to do that and you don't do well, You don't have a right to go to your neighbor directly, and you don't have a right to go to your government and say, go to my neighbor and take care of me because I didn't meet up with my responsibilities. They have to face the consequences. No, the states definitely have a right to be wrong, and the states are supposed to correct it. But there are limits, and that's why we have a Constitution. But the Constitution doesn't give license to the federal government. I mean, the federal government has taken license, and they're too much involved, but the Constitution is a restriction on the federal government. It's not a restriction on the states, and it's not a restriction on personal liberties. So therefore, what we must do is obey the law. Slavery and civil liberties, I mean, there's quite a few things, but not most things. Most things were left to the states. Monetary issue was left to the federal government. Defense was left to the federal government. But most, like education, why in the world have we ever drifted to the point where we allow this casualness to ignore the Constitution and say it's a federal function? We don't need the Department of Education. We need those things taken care of up at the state level.
Governor.
And the Energy Department, too.
There you go.
Governor, is there a third area you want to cut?
On that, I have supported the amendment that defines life at conception. I think that's important. But I don't endorse the idea that the enforcement should come from the federal government. We don't need another police force in Washington. We already have 100,000 bureaucrats running around with guns, so we don't need more enforcement. All acts of violence under our Constitution, like murder and injury and robbery, that's not a federal offense. It's a state offense, and laws do vary. So I would not want to repeal that provision. It was meant that it would be handled at the states. And we have to remember, when we tend to nationalize things, we expose ourselves to great danger, because when they make a mistake, it's national. This is the reason that we had Roe versus Wade. They should have never heard that case. They nationalized it. So I'm very cautious about nationalizing these laws. So it would be much better to state when life begins, make the law enforcement at the state level, which has been traditional. But it should not be that we enforce this law at the national level, but there's no reason why we can't define when life begins.
But if they nationalize the problem, why is it wrong to nationalize the solution?
Well, and I would be glad to do that. And the solution, it would have been solved 10 years ago, because I've been pushing a law that could have been passed by majority vote when we had the House and the Senate and the presidency. If we would have been determined, we could have repealed Roe versus Wade by passing the law called the We the People Act. It removes the jurisdictions from the federal court. So you remove this jurisdiction, which is a constitutional authority. That could have been done 10 years ago. We could have continued to work on the amendment. We could have continued to change the courts. But if we would have passed that by majority vote, we would have saved millions of lives, and we have not had the support from the Right to Life community to at least do that, and I do not understand why that is the case, because we would have accomplished that in a short period of time. We would have not distracted from the national solution of amending the Constitution and changing our Supreme Court.